Hello and what is up YouTube? My name is G3Iron, your balding bearded commentator of all things Path of Exile. Welcome. I hope your opening weekend and week went well with all of the hubbubaloo about patches and economy changes, and your league starter hopefully was a success. Today what we're going to do is we're going to review the data from the opening week in the ongoing 324 Necropolis League. We're going to take a look at our ongoing spreadsheet where we take a look at as much data as we can that's all based off of the official Path of Exile ladders, and that is regurgitated and presented so beautifully through PoE Ninja. We're going to take a look at that particular data today, as well as the ongoing trends of player choices and popular builds. As I said in our last meta update from earlier on in the week, the part of the purpose of knowing all of this information is to help you be able to make better economic choices for your character and for your stash tab. If you know what players are playing, you can simply craft items for that particular market. If you know what other players are playing, you can make choices based off of what you would like to play, especially in a trade economy situation where you want to avoid particularly popular builds, or maybe you just want to be a sheep and go along with the meta because, well, maybe the meta has made a decision about a really particularly good build, and it's a good decision because the build overall handles a whole bunch of content in a really fun and engaging way, in a way that you can enjoy as well. If you are new to the channel, you can of course like, subscribe, and ding the bell to be notified about future video discussions just like this one. And without any further ado, let's take a look at the data. There are 4 builds that are really emerging at the moment as top popular picks among the softcore trade league environment. They are Detonate Dead, which has kind of 2 different ways that it's being expressed in the ladder because there's 2 different formats for it. There's the COC version, which is generally being played by Inquisitors. 63% of the league just has on any link Detonate Dead of chain reaction linked. So that's 9,000 players. So that's more players are playing Detonate Dead, just having it on any link, or Detonate Dead of chain reaction specifically, on any link than any other 2 builds combined, most of the time 3 builds combined. So there's a whole bunch of players playing Detonate Dead. On top of that, there's another way to play it, which is of course the self-cast version, which oftentimes is linked to a 5 link, and you can see that there's more than 3,000 players that are playing with Detonate Dead on a 5 link. Lightning Arrow is also still there in the top couple of spots with a whole bunch of players primarily playing Deadeye. Those are primarily, I think, players who are rushing and magic finding either to level 100 or are just continually playing with that Zoom build style. But one of the builds that is emerging, and more players are actually switching to it as more and more players are becoming comfortable with the idea of having automation on Detonate Mines, is Hex Blast. Hex Blast typically has been played as a miner build, and one of the things that has held players back in the past from playing miner builds is the 2-button nature of oftentimes miner build archetypes. And so oftentimes what players have done over the last many years of Path of Exile is rather play a trap build, which at least fires off, it at least triggers when you throw it at a pack, whereas with mines you have to throw it at the pack and then detonate it. Well, with a couple of new different tips and tricks to be able to self-cast and then also automate the detonation, mines can now play in a similar fashion to what traps used to, and traps used to have something of a delayed feel for what it felt like to play a self-caster based character. So in other words, that's a long way of saying mines now feel more like a self-cast skill in terms of smoothness and in terms of number of buttons required. And so I think that's part of the reason why more players are gravitating towards things like Hex Blast, which has honestly been an insane skill for a long time. I used it in Ruthless. I want to say 2.5 years ago when Ruthless first came out. It was my best character. I was playing it on a champion, and Hex Blast by far, out of any skill that I was leveling with and playing with in hardcore Ruthless, Hex Blast just took the cake. It was the most fun. It was the most enjoyable. It was also the strongest character that I played, and that was with like basically no links that I had found. Hex Blast was better than pretty much everything else. So it's no shock to me that players with increased levels of quality of life to be able to play as a miner and take advantage of all the damage that mines can offer are now switching over and playing as miners because there's more quality of life options to reduce the strain on your wrists and on your clicks and to be able to automate some of those detonations. Before we jump over into the spreadsheet where we're going to break down all of the numbers, just one last glimpse over at the ladder. This is what the ladder looked like during the opening week. We've got more than 99,000 players registering across 4 different ladders that we are tracking for the 324 Necropolis League. So this is across softcore trade, this is across hardcore trade, and then solo self-found for both softcore and hardcore versions. By far, the vast majority of players are playing softcore trade league. Over 70,000 players are playing in softcore trade league, and so that's where the primary amount of data is at. So for those of you that are watching this for economic data, in order to get a glimpse of where players are making decisions and what sort of items you should be crafting for and what sort of builds players are swapping to or thinking about swapping to, you should be able to look at this data with some level of reliability, just looking at the softcore trade league data in order to be able to see the trends. Now, one of the reasons economically to include the hardcore versions of solo self-found as well as trade, economically, this is something to think about, because oftentimes players, when they're playing a particular build in softcore and they come up against a problem, let's say they're dying too much, a lot of the times players will go and look for a hardcore version of a build in order to see what they can do to bolster their defenses. So economically, what you want to be paying attention to is not just what players are doing in softcore trade league, but also in hardcore trade league to see, okay, what's a tankier version of maybe the same build or the same archetype that a player might swap over to, who might be shopping in the market. Then the reason why you incorporate solo self-found is because there are potentially out there, especially over the opening course of a few weeks in a league, players who haven't made very much currency. And so some players will actually be following after a pattern of a solo self-found playstyle because they don't want to interact with the trade market as much. There's a lot of players who only go onto the market sites to buy. They don't go to sell. They only play the game to acquire currency through drops, and then the drops that they get, they then use to purchase upgrades for their character. Well, for those players, that's almost a semi sort of solo self-found sort of approach. It's kind of a halfway approach. You are still interacting with the market, but you're not leveraging the market in order to be a springboard for your character to really reach new echelons and new tiers of power levels. What you're doing is you're playing the game to find your currency and then spending the currency on relatively achievable goals for upgrades as you're searching the market. So by paying attention to the solo self-found meta and choices that players are making over there, those of us who are playing softcore trade league, you can actually get an idea of what players might be incrementally looking for in upgrades to their build. So it's important to pay attention to all 4 of these styles of gameplay. Even if you're just playing solos, or even if you're just playing trade league softcore, you still want to pay attention to all 4 of these as you're making economic decisions, whether that's for crafting, whether that's for buying, or whether that's for selling, or whether that's for playing different builds. Maybe there's a build out there that's got better damage in a different style of league than yours. Maybe you're too tanky for softcore and you could use some improvement there. Maybe somebody else in a different style or format of Path of Exile has answered a question you've got for your build, either offensively or defensively. So paying attention can benefit your character and your play, and it can also benefit you economically if you're in a trade league. All right, let's take a look at our spreadsheet and our data. Just a quick introduction to this. This is our 324 Ascendancy Comparisons chart. This is where we're taking all the data that's available to us from the ladders and comparing it on a day-to-day basis, on a week-to-week basis. If you want to take a look at the document yourself and peruse it, or make changes, or make edits, or use this as a template for yourself to mess around with, or as an idea base for you to then play with and collect your own data, you can do so. You can simply go into the file. You can make a copy once you're actually viewing the document, and then simply save the document for yourself to be able to make a copy off of and play around with the data. But this is going to be down below in the video description with a viewable link that you can look at and peruse the data. Just in case I make any mistakes or there's any typos in the data, you can go ahead and double check and fact check and store it for your own benefit. All right, so there are 3 tabs in this particular spreadsheet so far. We'll add more as we go on. The first tab is day-to-day changes from leagues. So we had ancestor data at the start of the league, but that drops off of the PoE Ninja available searchable data. And so all that you can go back and look to is the actual ladder page, which is only going to give you the final ladder stage of Ancestor. So we dropped off an Ancestor recording. So if you're wondering why there's no data over here for Ancestor League, that's why. The first 3 days we were able to capture it, but moving on we won't be able to. So this is a comparative change from day to day. Green is going to indicate a positive growth from the previous day. whereas blue is going to indicate a change from the previous league. So for instance, during, week 1 of Softcore Affliction, there were in total 63,000 players in the Softcore Trade League of Affliction at the week 1 snapshot. When you compare that with the week 1 snapshot of 324 Necropolis, we've got over 71,000. That is a pretty large number in terms of player growth and comparison. The purple numbers, by the way, are just, again, the player changes here, but just in a slightly different format, because I'll probably play around with that to generate a different number calculation in the future to give us like a week-by-week total, running total of how the player count changed. But what we can see here overall is that there are more players being tracked on the ladder in Necropolis. There just are across the board. Whether it was day 4, whether it's day 5, whether it's day 6, whether it's a week 1, even all the way dating back to day 1, day 2, day 3. At least according to the numbers that we have on the ladder, there are more players who are playing all 4 of the different versions of Path of Exile, all 4 of the different formats that we are tracking across the board. That has continued regardless of the drama that happened midweek with the changes to the way how divine orbs are being farmed and maps and populated and all that. We have a video out there already from this week that we discussed that a little bit about the printing of divines and the fun map hideout sort of style of farming for divines. So even after the patch, a whole bunch of players are playing Necropolis in a way that rivals and even exceeds Affliction. So all of the players out there who are doing their best Kermit impersonation, "Oh, Iron, I can't believe that, anybody would play Necropolis. The league is dead. The new patch has absolutely destroyed gameplay and enjoyment, and the economy's all out of whack." Okay, anybody that's making those claims isn't paying attention to the data. If you want to back up the data saying that the league is dead, that less players are playing, you're going to need to show that, right? Like, you need to make an argument that's based off of facts in some way. Now, there's lots of different nuance that we can add on to this. This data is not perfect. This doesn't give us a total player count. This just tracks the ladder. But from the data that we've got, what we've got that's available, it shows us that there's more players playing Necropolis than we're playing Affliction. Overall, every single day that Necropolis has been out, it has grown across all 4 of these formats except for day 2 in solo self-found hardcore and day 5 in hardcore. Other than that, there has been growth from day to day. There has been growth from league to league. Only solo self-found hardcore has seen a little bit of a dip in terms of the player numbers of playing solo self-found hardcore in Necropolis versus Affliction. So overall, more players are playing Necropolis. It should mean that the economy is moving and there's more items in the economy and more players available to make trades and more players available and looking to make trades. All right, so the second tab did all of this, what we're about to do here, but just for the opening weekend. We already had a video out about that earlier in the week if you just want to compare that. But here's where we are 1 week in. So 71,000 players are playing in the Softcore Necropolis League. Almost 10,000, 9,400 are playing hardcore. 12,000 are playing solo self-found softcore, and then 6,000 are playing over in Necropolis hardcore solo self-found. So this gives us our total of around 99,000. Almost 100,000 players are playing. 71,000 of these are level 86 or above from softcore. So this is not like, oh, well, that's a bunch of low-level ruthless players. No, this is pretty much 70,000 plus players who are going to be active in searching and selling and building things and putting things up and interacting with the market. That's a lot of players. That's a really, really healthy ladder number. Again, that's not everybody. And there's lots of different players who might have their profile set to private. There's lots of different players who might simply be playing low level and only playing with a small group of friends or with a spouse or etc. or teaching new players how to play. So this is not every player who's playing Path of Exile, but this is representative of a good number of players, 70,000 plus players that are going to be interacting and available with the market. Now, what this does and shows us in terms of the ascendancies, it was actually pretty interesting to see. If you scroll down on the chart, you can actually see that there are changes from the opening weekend in league starters and what players were playing to where we're at now. It's not much of changes, but we are starting to see some players switch from their league starter build into a secondary build. There are some players that are starting that. So in softcore, the biggest changes are the occultist has gone up by few percentage points, and the Hierophant has gone up by a few percentage points. Those percentage points have come from the Necromancer, the Guardian, and the Deadeye, all generally taking a hit. Fewer players are playing those particular ascendancies as players are swapping over onto Occultist. Not a shock as players are swapping over maybe to Hexblast. Not a shock as players are swapping over to a whole slew of different mana stacking base characters that are available on Hierophant. So there's a little bit of a shift going on. I would say generally over the next week to 2 weeks, a content creator, somebody in the community, maybe somebody that you know, maybe somebody you've never heard of, will probably come out with a particular build that will then be defined as the meta build of the league. Maybe the meta build of the league is already here. Maybe it's Hexblast. Maybe it's Lightning Arrow. Maybe it's Detonate Dead of Chain Reaction. But maybe something else will come out. Maybe a unique interaction will come out with a particular set of uniques. Maybe a unique minion will be found. Who knows? But generally, it's weeks 2 and week 3 that actually define the meta for the build that's going to take over and be known for in the league. Whether that was in Affliction and it was Magic Find, whether it was decades ago and it was what, triple Herald Elementalist, right? Like, it doesn't matter what it is. It's usually week 2 to week 3 that somebody will come out with a build, and then the entirety, or not the entirety, the vast majority of the player base will go, that's the build, I want to play that. Over at Hardcore, one of the things that's interesting is there's less growth, right? So the growth and the change in total number of players from the opening weekend to where we're at now is only 693. So that's not a very large number of players in terms of additional players coming onto the ladder, which makes the changes in what is popular actually stand out more. So Necromancer has gone up by 4%, Hierophant has gone up by 5%, and Champion has gone up by 4% in terms of their popularity. And that's very, very interesting to see and to pay attention to keep an eye on, because it doesn't mean that there's this massive influx of all of a sudden new players who are hitting the ladder. What it means is some of the players who are on the ladder, or the ladder itself, as it shrinks, as it contracts, because of course in Hardcore you're always losing characters, but they don't get removed from the ladder. Other players who have lost top tier characters are then building other characters, and they're choosing where else to pivot to. So it seems like Necromancer and Hierophant and Champion are the 3 places where players are generally building out their second character, or maybe their third character if they've already ripped a couple of characters. In solo self-found Hardcore, what we see is a whole bunch of losses across the way, but they're not by very much. Just simple low drops across the way, which can be accounted for generally in players finding particular items, or players actually really folding out or filling out their particular build that they had in mind. Maybe there was a unique that they found that allowed them to pivot, but in general, in solo self-found, you don't see much pivoting along the way until, again, a content creator or someone shows this is how you can achieve this build, and you only need this unique, and you can farm it in this way in solo self-found. The last thing I want to point out here on the data today is the number of players that we've had increase since opening weekend. So opening weekend, the total number of players that we had here on the second page was, what was it, 75,000 players? And so here we go at the end of the week, we've added more than 23,000 players to all of these ladders, right? We're sitting at 99,000 players across all 4 of these different ladders. So 23,000 players have been added to the ladder over the last week. That's a lot, 23,000 characters, I should say, right? Because one player could have multiple characters on the ladder. That's a lot of characters that have been added in 1 week. I just want to summarize this and summarize all this data by saying anybody that is decrying and really upset and sad because of divine changes, because of league disappointment, because of just your character, your league starter didn't start off that well, just recognize Necropolis is really in a great spot right now in terms of core gameplay. The actual league mechanic itself is getting figured out. There's more and more discussions on a daily basis about how to optimize your crafting setup for Necropolis crafting. There's more and more discussions coming out for a variety of different builds every single day, and for approaches for farming and different Atlas passives to be using for collecting different strategies and for producing different results. So really, overall, the core state of Path of Exile probably at a pretty strong spot. And this is a rare amount of praise coming from me, because for the last 3 to 4 years I've been complaining, saying that Path of Exile as a core game has really taken a nosedive past Heist. And so I think at the moment, core gameplay, based off of just the player numbers, players are saying they're really appreciating where the game is at with Necropolis League as a core state. Yes, there's controversy. Yes, there's difference of opinions regarding the actual league mechanic itself. But overall, as a community, the community response in general from playtime and from players actually interacting both economically as well as in solo self-found leagues, players are generally saying this right now, Path of Exile in this moment, is a game that we would like to play regardless of the league mechanic. Well, thanks so much for joining us for today's discussion. I'd love to hear down below your own thoughts. What are you currently playing? We've talked a lot about what other players are playing, other ascendancies, other build types, other sorts of general trends in the player base. What are you playing currently for the 324 second weekend of Necropolis League? And then also, is your league starter still your current build? Maybe the build that you league started turned out to be a flop. Maybe it turned out to be an awesome, successful hit and you're really enjoying it. My own build, I'm still on the same character, but I actually pivoted ascendancies, but I'm going to do a whole video, little diary update on how my league starter went and where it's currently going and where I'm heading into the future with the build. So that's yet to come, so stay tuned for that. What is the build that you're currently playing? Did you swap? And if you swapped, why? And if you didn't swap, why? What about your league starter is keeping you going? Are there new echelons of player power to still yet reach that you feel are attainable on the build and using the currency farming strategy that you particularly are implementing at the moment? What are some of those answers? I'd love to hear your comments down below. And as always, I'm happy to interact with you, and I'll try and get back to each and every one of you as time allows. Thanks so much for watching, and I hope the ongoing 324 Necropolis League is the league. A Mirror of Calandra drops for you.
Thanks for watching that video. If you'd like more information on any of our discussion points today, you can see them down below in the video description. If you'd also like to join our Discord or support our Patreon, you can do so with the links down below. Thanks again, and big shout out to all of our Patreon supporters.